The silver research ship shook violently as it entered the atmosphere of planet K-24. Inside, Lyra gripped her control panel, her feathered hands trembling as warning lights flashed across the screens. She wasn't supposed to be this close to the surface. This was meant to be a simple, high-altitude scan of the planet's wildlife. Warning. Engine failure. Warning. Engine failure. The ship's computer repeated the words that no pilot ever wanted to hear. Through the viewport, Lyra could see the dense forest canopy getting closer and closer. Her heart raced as she tried to restart the engines, but nothing worked. Lyra belonged to the Avari race, beings known for their intelligence and advanced technology. With her blue-tinted feathers and large, owl-like eyes, she was built for the safety of climate-controlled research stations, not for crash landing on one of the most dangerous planets in the known galaxy. The trees were getting closer now. Lyra sent out one last distress signal before impact, but the atmospheric interference garbled the transmission. She pulled back hard on the controls, trying to glide the ship to a clearer area she spotted ahead. A small break in the endless sea of trees. The impact came fast and hard. Metal screamed against wood as the ship carved a path through the forest. Trees snapped like twigs under the force of the crash. Lyra's safety harness dug into her chest, and the emergency foam deployed around her, protecting her from the worst of the impact. Finally, after what felt like forever, the ship stopped moving. When Lyra opened her eyes, smoke was filling the cabin. Her hands shook as she undid her safety harness and grabbed her emergency pack. The ship's door was jammed, but she managed to kick it open with strength she didn't know she had. As she stumbled out into the alien forest, she could hear her ship's systems dying behind her. The air was thick and humid, nothing like the carefully filtered atmosphere she was used to. Lyra checked her personal shield generator. It was damaged in the crash, operating at only 20% power. Without it, she would be completely exposed to this world's dangers. She pulled out her data tablet, trying to get her bearings. The screen flickered weakly, showing her location. She was deep in the planet's equatorial forest zone, known for its diverse and deadly predator population. Her distress beacon was working, but barely. It would take days, maybe weeks, for any rescue ship to reach her. A deep roar echoed through the trees, making her feathers stand on end. It wasn't close, but it wasn't far enough away either. Lyra had studied this planet's wildlife from orbit. She knew what kind of creatures made sounds like that. She needed to find shelter, and fast. Moving away from her smoking ship, Lyra tried to remember her survival training. Find high ground. Look for water. Avoid open spaces. Her legs were shaking as she walked, partly from the crash, and partly from fear. Every sound made her jump. The rustle of leaves, the crack of branches, the distant cries of animals she hoped wouldn't find her. The sun was starting to set, painting the sky in strange colors she had only seen in atmospheric data charts. The temperature was dropping, and her body, used to regulated environments, was starting to shiver. She needed to find shelter before night fell. After an hour of careful walking, Lyra found a hollow at the base of a massive tree. It wasn't ideal, but it would have to do. She crawled inside, clutching her emergency pack to her chest. The hollow was dry and seemed unused by any local creatures. As darkness fell, the forest came alive with sounds, clicking, howling, rustling, and other noises she couldn't even describe. Her shield generator hummed weakly, its power dropping even further. Lyra checked her distress beacon one more time, praying someone would find her signal. She didn't sleep that first night. How could she? Every sound could be death approaching. Her advanced education, her technological knowledge, none of it seemed to matter here. On this world, she was just another prey animal, hiding in the dark from things with teeth and claws. The night grew longer, and Lyra realized a terrible truth. She might not survive long enough to be rescued. Dawn brought no comfort to Lyra. Her shield generator had dropped to 5% power during the night, and strange tracks in the mud near her hiding place told her that something big had passed by while she huddled in the darkness. A new sound caught her attention, a deep, rumbling growl that made her feathers flatten in fear. She peeked out of her hollow and froze. Less than 50 meters away, 3 massive creatures stood sniffing the air. They looked like a horrible mix between the hunting beasts she'd studied in her planet's archives. Long, scaled bodies, powerful legs, and heads full of teeth that could crush bone. Lyra held her breath. Her shield was too weak to protect her now. The creatures turned their heads toward her tree, their nostrils flaring. They had caught her scent. The first beast took a step toward her hiding place. Lyra's mind raced. She couldn't outrun them, couldn't fight them, couldn't even call for help. This was how it would end, torn apart on a primitive world, far from home. Then something unexpected happened. A sharp whistle cut through the air, followed by the crack of a strange weapon. The beast spun around, snarling at this new threat. Another whistle, another crack, and one of the creatures yelped in pain. "Over here, you ugly bastards," a voice called out. Lyra couldn't believe what she was seeing. A figure stood at the edge of the clearing, a being without scales or feathers, wearing simple clothing and holding what looked like a primitive projectile weapon. The beasts charged at the newcomer, but he didn't run. Instead, he fired his weapon again, and threw something that exploded in a cloud of sharp-smelling smoke. The creatures backed away, confused and angry. The stranger kept moving, keeping the beasts' attention, leading them away from Lyra's tree. After what seemed like forever, the sounds of the conflict faded into the forest. Lyra stayed frozen in her hiding place, not sure if it was safe to move. Had she really seen what she thought she saw? A human. "Here. You can come out now," the voice called from nearby. "They're gone. Probably won't be back for a while. They hate the smell of that smoke." Lyra hesitated. She knew about humans. Everyone did. They were a relatively new species to galactic society, considered primitive by most advanced races. They barely had space travel, still used chemical-powered weapons, and hadn't even evolved basic natural defenses like scales or claws. "Look," the voice continued, closer now. "Your ship crashed yesterday. I saw the smoke. Been tracking you since dawn, making sure the local wildlife didn't find you first. Guess I cut that one a bit close." Slowly, Lyra emerged from her hollow. The human stood a few meters away, looking strange and vulnerable in his simple clothing. He had no natural armor, no claws, not even decent teeth for fighting. Yet somehow, he had driven away 3 apex predators. "I'm Jack," he said, lowering his weapon. "And you look like you could use some help." Lyra studied him carefully. Her training said humans were unpredictable, potentially dangerous in their primitive way. But right now, she was out of options. Her shield generator gave a final weak beep and died completely. "I am researcher Lyra," she said, trying to sound calm and professional despite her fear. "My ship, there was a malfunction." Jack nodded. "Yeah, I saw the crash site. Pretty rough landing. You're lucky to be alive." He looked at the sky, then back at her. "More of those hunters will be coming soon. They hunt in waves around here. My camp is about 2 hours' walk from here. It's safe, got good walls, and I've got a long-range comm unit. Not as fancy as what you're probably used to, but it works." Lyra's scientific mind raced with questions. How did this human survive here? Why wasn't he afraid? How did he know so much about the local predators? But more hunters were coming, and she had no protection now. "I'd accept your offer of assistance," she said formally. Jack just smiled. "Good choice. Stay close, walk quiet, and try to keep up. This forest's got a lot of things that would love to have us for breakfast." And so Lyra, a member of one of the most advanced species in the galaxy, found herself following a primitive human through one of the deadliest environments known to science. She didn't know it yet, but her view of humans, and the galaxy, was about to change forever. "Stop," Jack whispered, holding up his hand. Lyra froze mid-step, her heart racing. They had been walking for an hour through the dense forest, and every sound still made her feathers quiver. "Look at the ground," Jack said, pointing to something Lyra would have missed completely. "See those marks? Fresh tracks. Big Hunter passed through here maybe 20 minutes ago." Lyra stared at the strange marks in the dirt. To her, they just looked like random dents in the ground. "How can you tell all that?" she asked. Jack knelt down, gesturing for her to do the same. "See how the mud's still wet here? And these edges haven't dried yet." He traced the air above the tracks without touching them. "That's how you know they're fresh. Size tells you what made them. Direction tells you where they're going." Lyra tried to memorize what he was showing her, but it all seemed so primitive compared to her usual scientific instruments. Still, she had to admit it was impressive. Without any technology, Jack could read the forest like she read data screens. "Here's your first lesson," Jack said, standing up. "Technology's great, but it can fail. Your eyes, your ears, your brain. Those are tools that don't need power cells." He tapped his head. "Best survival computer ever made." They continued walking, but now Jack pointed out more signs. Broken twigs, disturbed leaves, marks on trees. He showed her how to move quietly, placing her feet carefully to avoid making noise. When they crossed a stream, he demonstrated how to check if the water was safe to drink by looking for certain plants growing nearby. "But don't you need filters? Purifiers?" Lyra asked, watching in amazement as Jack drank directly from the stream. Jack shook his head. "Those are good to have, sure. But humans, we evolved drinking from streams and lakes. Our bodies are pretty good at handling natural water. Just got to know what to look for." As they walked, Jack showed her how to make basic tools. A simple spear from a straight branch, a rope from tough vines, even a whistle from a hollow reed that could mimic animal calls. Lyra was fascinated. Her people would have used molecular assemblers to create perfect tools, but Jack's methods required no power, no complex machines. "The most dangerous thing in survival situations," Jack explained as he helped her make her own spear, "is thinking you're helpless without your usual tools. Everything you need is right here. You just have to know how to use it." Suddenly, Jack stopped again. This time, Lyra noticed the silence before he said anything. The forest had gone quiet. No animal sounds, no insect noises. "Something's hunting nearby," Jack whispered. "When the forest goes quiet, that's your warning." They carefully moved behind a large tree. Jack pointed up, and Lyra saw a platform hidden in the branches. They climbed up quickly and quietly, just as a massive creature stalked into view below them. "That's why we make these rest spots," Jack explained softly as they watched the predator pass. "Most hunters here don't look up. They evolved chasing ground prey." From their safe perch, Jack taught her how to identify different animal calls, what they meant, and how to tell if something was hurt, hunting, or calling for help. Lyra realized she was learning more about real animal behavior in these few hours than she had in years of theoretical study. "Your people," she said finally, "they're not primitive at all, are they? You see things differently." Jack smiled. "We're young compared to your species, sure, but humans, we survived on Earth alongside some pretty scary creatures. We didn't have fancy shields or advanced weapons. We had to use these." He tapped his head again, then his hands. "Our brains and our ability to make tools. That's what made us Earth's top predator." As the sun moved higher in the sky, Lyra found herself seeing the forest differently. It wasn't just a hostile environment to be feared. With the right knowledge, it was full of resources, full of signs and signals, if you knew how to read them. She was beginning to understand that there was more than one kind of advanced civilization. Sometimes, the ability to survive with nothing was more impressive than having everything. The afternoon sun beat down on Lyra's feathers as she and Jack climbed yet another steep hill. They had been traveling for 2 days now, covering ground slowly but safely. Her feet hurt, her muscles ached, and she was tired in ways she had never experienced before. "How much further?" she asked, trying not to sound like she was complaining. She was a scientist, after all, not some helpless child. Jack pointed to a distant mountain peak. "My base camp is near that mountain. Should take us another 3 days, if we're careful." He looked at the sky, frowning. "And we need to be careful. Weather's changing." Lyra looked up but saw nothing unusual. "How can you tell?" "Air pressure's dropping. Can feel it in my joints." Jack adjusted his pack. "Storm's coming. Big one. We need to find shelter before it hits." They pushed on through the thick forest, moving faster now. Lyra was getting better at walking quietly, though she still couldn't match Jack's silent movement. She noticed things now that she would have missed before: broken branches, disturbed ground, the way certain birds went quiet when danger was near. The wind started picking up as dark clouds gathered overhead. Thunder rumbled in the distance, and Lyra jumped at the sound. "Over there," Jack said, pointing to a rock formation. "There's a cave system I've used before. We can wait out the storm." They reached the cave just as the rain started, huge drops that hit the ground like small explosions. Inside, Jack quickly set up what he called a camp, though to Lyra it seemed impossibly basic: just some dry wood for a fire, a couple of sleeping spots away from the cave mouth, and simple traps near the entrance to warn them of visitors. "Storms here last a while," Jack explained as he got a fire going using nothing but sticks and dried grass. "Good time to rest and plan." Lightning flashed outside, illuminating the cave. In the brief light, Lyra saw drawings on the cave walls. Maps, she realized. Jack had been marking his explorations. "You've mapped this whole area?" she asked, impressed despite herself. "Had to. Arrived here 3 years ago on a survey mission. Ship got damaged, just like yours. Rescue team couldn't get through because of the magnetic storms. Had to learn to survive." He smiled. "Turned out to be the best research opportunity of my life." The storm raged outside, but inside their cave, Jack taught Lyra how to read his maps. He showed her the safe routes, the dangerous areas, the places where the great hunting packs roamed. It was all recorded in a simple but effective way that anyone could understand. "Tomorrow will be tricky," he said, pointing to an area on the map. "We have to cross the Great Plain. No cover for almost 2 kilometers. Have to time it just right." "Why not go around?" Lyra asked. "Takes too long. More time in the open means more chances for something to find us. Quick crossing is safer." He looked at her seriously. "But you'll have to run. Can you do that?" Lyra nodded, though her legs already ached at the thought. "I can do it." The night grew deeper, and the storm showed no signs of stopping. Jack took first watch, while Lyra tried to sleep. As she drifted off, she found herself thinking about how wrong her people were about humans. They weren't primitive at all. They were survivors, adaptable in ways her species had forgotten. A loud roar echoed from somewhere in the storm, closer than she would have liked. Jack didn't even flinch, just added more wood to the fire. "Don't worry," he said, noticing her tension. "Nothing's hunting in this weather. Too hard to track prey. We're safe here." Lyra tried to relax. 3 days more to reach safety. 3 days of dangers she couldn't imagine. But somehow, with this strange human guiding her, she felt more confident than she had since the crash. She just hoped she was strong enough for what lay ahead, especially tomorrow's run across the Great Plain. The Great Plain stretched out before them like a sea of tall grass, swaying in the morning breeze. Lyra and Jack crouched at the forest's edge, watching for any movement in the golden yellow field ahead. "Remember what I told you," Jack whispered. "Run steady, not fast. Follow my footsteps exactly. Don't stop for anything." He checked his weapon one last time. "And if I say drop, you drop immediately." Lyra nodded, her heart already racing. They had waited for this moment since dawn, when the morning fog would give them some cover, but the sun would be bright enough to spot dangers ahead. "Now," Jack said, and they burst from their hiding spot. The grass was chest-high, whipping past them as they ran. Jack moved with surprising speed, creating a path that Lyra followed closely. Her legs burned, but she kept going, remembering his warning about the dangers of stopping in the open. They were halfway across when they heard it, a high-pitched hunting call from behind them. Then another answered from their left, and another from their right. "Pack hunters," Jack shouted. "Run." Lyra didn't need to be told twice. She could hear them now, the sound of multiple large bodies moving through the grass, converging on their position. These weren't the usual predators they'd avoided before. These were the apex hunters of this world, the ones Jack had warned her about. "Drop," Jack yelled suddenly, and Lyra threw herself down without hesitation. Something large leaped over them. A massive creature with scales, feathers, and teeth longer than her fingers. It landed ahead of them, blocking their path. Jack was up in an instant, his weapon ready. The creature was twice his size, but he stood his ground. "Back!" He shouted at it, his voice deep and commanding. The beast hesitated for a moment, surprised by this prey that didn't run. But more were coming. Lyra could see them now. At least 8 of them, circling through the grass. They were beautiful in a terrifying way, moving with perfect coordination, each one knowing exactly where the others were. "The trees," Jack said calmly, though they were still 100 meters away. "When I say run, head straight for that big one with the split trunk. Don't look back. Don't stop." The pack was closing in. Lyra could see their tactics now. Some would chase them toward the others waiting ahead. A perfect trap. But Jack wasn't done. He pulled something from his pack, several small objects she hadn't seen before. With quick movements, he threw them in different directions. They exploded into clouds of that sharp-smelling smoke he'd used before. The creatures snarled in confusion as the wind carried the smoke between them. Their perfect formation broke as they tried to avoid the irritating clouds. "Run," Jack shouted, and they ran. The pack recovered quickly, but now their coordination was broken. Some charged straight at them, while others tried to circle around the smoke. Jack fired his weapon several times, not trying to kill, but making the creatures flinch and dodge. Lyra's lungs were burning, her legs felt like lead, but she ran as she'd never run before. The tree was getting closer. Behind them, she could hear the pack regaining their formation, their feet thundering against the ground. "Almost there," Jack called. "Get ready to climb." They reached the tree just as the pack closed in. Jack spun around, something new in his hand. A flash of light, a loud bang, and the lead creature leaped back with a yelp. The others hesitated, giving Lyra time to scramble up the trunk. Jack followed quickly, climbing with surprising agility. The creatures jumped and snapped at their feet, but they couldn't reach high enough. Safe in the branches, they watched as the pack circled the tree, frustrated but patient. "They'll wait for hours," Jack said, catching his breath. "But that's okay. Gives us time to plan our next move." Lyra stared at him in amazement. They had just escaped certain death, and he was already thinking about what to do next. "How did you know?" she asked. "About their tactics, their weaknesses." Jack smiled grimly. "Been studying them for 3 years. Learned their habits. Had to. They're the ones who destroyed my ship." Below them, the pack settled in to wait, their golden eyes never leaving their treed prey. But for the first time, Lyra wasn't terrified. Somehow, this human would find a way through this too. The sun was setting, and the pack still hadn't left. For hours, Lyra and Jack had waited in the tree while the creatures below took turns resting, making sure their prey couldn't escape. "They're smart," Jack said quietly, watching the pack's movements. "But we're smarter." He had spent the last hour preparing something from items in his pack, small bundles wrapped in leaves. "What's the plan?" Lyra asked. Her legs had stopped shaking, but the height and the waiting were getting to her. "Night's coming. That's when they're strongest. Better night vision, better hunting skills." Jack tested the branch beneath them. which is exactly why we're not going to wait for dark. He showed her the bundles he'd made. These are mix of things they hate: strong-smelling plants, irritating sap. We'll use these to split their formation. See that rocky area? He pointed to a group of boulders about 50 meters away. That's where we're heading. Lyra looked at the distance, then at the pack below. We'll never make it. We will. Jack's voice was firm. Because you're going to do exactly what I say, exactly when I say it. He pulled out his last few emergency flares. And because these hunters are about to learn why humans became Earth's top predators. The plan was simple but terrifying. They would drop the bundles to create a path of confusion, then run for the rocks. The pack would chase them, but the rocks would force them to split up, taking away their advantage of numbers. Ready? Jack asked as the sun touched the horizon. Lyra nodded, though her heart was racing again. She watched as Jack carefully positioned himself on a lower branch. Now, he shouted, throwing the first bundle. It exploded in a cloud of stinging particles right in the middle of the pack. The creatures leaped back, snarling in pain and confusion. More bundles followed, creating a corridor of chaos through their ranks. Go! Jack pushed her ahead of him as they dropped from the tree. They ran straight through the gap in the pack's formation. The creatures were still recovering from the sudden attack, their coordinated hunting pattern broken. Those that tried to chase them got facefuls of the irritating smoke. But the pack was quick to recover. They started closing in from both sides, trying to cut off the path to the rocks. That's when Jack turned and fought back. He threw his flares, the bright lights and loud bangs making the creatures flinch and dodge. When one got too close, he met it with his spear, not trying to kill but jabbing at sensitive spots. Eyes, nose, mouth. The beast retreated with a yelp of pain. They reached the rocks just as the pack regrouped. Jack pushed Lyra toward a narrow gap between two boulders. Through here. Quick. The passage was tight, forcing them to go single file. Behind them, the pack had to split up, trying to come at them from different directions. But now their coordination was gone. They couldn't attack as one anymore. Jack took position at a choke point, where the rocks formed a natural barrier. When the first creature tried to squeeze through, he was ready. His spear struck its sensitive nose, making it retreat with a howl. Another tried to leap over the rocks, but Jack's last flare sent it scrambling back. Lyra watched in amazement as this single human held off creatures that her people considered unstoppable killing machines. He didn't try to match their strength or speed. Instead, he used the terrain, used their own hunting instincts against them, and fought with a calculated precision that turned their size into a disadvantage. After several failed attempts to reach their prey, the pack's enthusiasm began to fade. One by one, they pulled back, frustrated by this prey that wouldn't be caught, that fought back in ways they didn't understand. Finally, the last hunter retreated, leaving them alone among the rocks as night fell. They won't come back, Jack said, checking her for injuries. Not tonight, at least. They've learned we're too much trouble. Lyra stared at him with new understanding. You didn't just survive here for 3 years, she said. You mastered this world. Jack shook his head. No one masters this world. But humans? We learn. We adapt. And we never, ever give up. He looked toward the distant mountain. Now come on. We're nearly there. Jack's base camp wasn't what Lyra had expected. Instead of primitive shelters, she found a carefully designed compound built into the side of the mountain. Walls made from local stone and wood created a natural fortress, while cleverly placed platforms gave clear views of all approaches. Home sweet home, Jack said as he secured the heavy gate behind them. Not exactly a luxury space station, but it keeps the locals out. Inside, Lyra discovered that Jack had turned his survival situation into something remarkable. He had gardens growing edible plants, water collection systems, and even a small workshop where he repaired and maintained his equipment. The long-range communicator is over here, he said, leading her to a corner of the main shelter. Had to fix it myself after the crash. Might not be as fancy as your ship's systems, but it reaches orbit just fine. As Jack worked to contact the rescue teams, Lyra walked around the camp, seeing it with new eyes. Everything had a purpose, every design showed careful thought and learning. This wasn't just survival, it was adaptation at its finest. "Good news," Jack called out. "Rescue ship can reach us in 2 days. Storm season's ending, so they can get through the magnetic interference." Lyra nodded, but she wasn't really listening. She was looking at the walls of Jack's shelter, covered in detailed drawings and notes. 3 years of observations about the planet's wildlife, weather patterns, and plant life. It was the most thorough field research she had ever seen. "You've documented everything," she said, amazed. "Had to. Best way to learn." Jack joined her by the wall. "Lot of scientists come to this planet, study it from orbit with their fancy sensors. But they miss so much. You have to be on the ground, have to see how everything connects." That night, as they sat by Jack's fire eating a meal he had prepared from his garden, Lyra finally asked the question that had been bothering her. "Why didn't you leave? When you learned how dangerous this place was, why stay?" Jack was quiet for a moment, looking at the fire. "Because this place taught me something important. Your people, my people, we're not so different. We've just forgotten different things." He gestured at the walls of notes. "Your people forgot how to survive without technology. My people forgot how to build ships that can cross galaxies. But we can learn from each other." The rescue ship arrived 2 days later, landing in a clearing near the camp. The rescue team was shocked to find Lyra not only alive but healthy, and even more shocked to find Jack's extensive research. As they prepared to leave, Lyra watched Jack pack up his notes and specimens. He had agreed to return with them. His research was too valuable to leave behind. "I have to write my report about the crash," she said. "About what happened here." Jack looked up from his packing. "Going to tell them how a primitive human saved you." Lyra shook her head. "No, I'm going to tell them how wrong we've been. About humans, about survival, about what it means to be advanced." She touched the wall of notes one last time. "You didn't just save my life, Jack. You showed me that there's more than one kind of strength, more than one kind of wisdom." As their ship lifted off, Lyra looked down at the planet that had nearly killed her. In her report, she would recommend that her people change how they studied dangerous worlds. That they learn from humans like Jack, who understood that true knowledge couldn't always be gained from a safe distance. "You know," Jack said, watching the planet shrink below them, "your people might not believe everything in your report." Lyra smiled. "Then we'll bring them here. Show them what you showed me." She looked at the human who had changed her understanding of the galaxy. After all, sometimes the best way to learn is to put aside what you think you know and start fresh. Jack nodded, and together they watched as the planet disappeared into the darkness of space, knowing that their experience would change how two civilizations saw each other forever.